Butter is one of the most unjustly demonized foods of the last 5 decades, and at the same time, one of the hardest to rehabilitate, because the belief that dairy fat clogs arteries and worsens diabetes is deeply embedded in medical and dietary recommendations that dominated the Western world from 1960 through the 2010 seconds. But what the most recent science has shown, consistently and in large-scale studies, is that this belief was based on incomplete evidence, and that natural butter, especially from grass-fed animals, not only does not worsen glycemic control in people with diabetes, but has ways of use that science has associated with improved insulin sensitivity and reduced postprandial glucose peaks. Today, I will show you the 7 ways to use butter that science has associated with blood sugar control, and why dairy fat is not the villain you thought it was. Before the 7 ways, the context that undoes 5 decades of misinformation. The myth that saturated fat from dairy causes diabetes began with Ansel Keys' studies in the 1960 seconds. Studies that selected data from countries confirming the hypothesis and ignored countries that contradicted it. This hypothesis became nutritional dogma and generated decades of recommendations to replace butter with margarine and full-fat dairy with skim versions. The problem: margarine, a partially hydrogenated vegetable fat product, contained trans fat, which proved significantly more harmful for insulin sensitivity and cardiovascular health than any natural dairy product. A meta-analysis in Annals of Internal Medicine, 2014, analyzing over 350,000 participants, found no association between dairy-saturated fat consumption and type 2 diabetes risk. Trans fat was associated with a 31% increase in heart attack risk and documented increase in insulin resistance. Way number 1, natural butter versus margarine, the distinction that changes everything. Natural butter contains natural fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K2, butyric acid, and CLA. Conventional margarine contains trans fats and refined vegetable oils, high in pro-inflammatory omega-6, without butter's bioactive compounds. A review in the European Journal of Nutrition showed adults consuming butter as their primary culinary fat for 12 weeks had consistently better inflammatory marker profiles than those consuming conventional margarine. This first way is not a preparation technique, it is a decision. Replace margarine with natural butter. Way number 2, add butter to cooked vegetables. Vegetables like broccoli, spinach, kale, carrots, squash, and sweet potato contain fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, and carotenoids like beta-carotene. These vitamins are only significantly absorbed in the presence of fat. Studies show that beta-carotene bioavailability from cooked carrots increases 3 to 5 times when served with a small amount of fat. Butter on vegetables also delays gastric emptying, reducing absorption speed of any carbohydrate in the same meal. Patricia was 66, a retired homemaker from Phoenix. When she started adding a teaspoon of butter to lunch vegetables, glucose 2 hours after lunch fell from average 181 to 153 milligrams per deciliter in 8 weeks. Way number 3, use butter before or at the start of carbohydrate meals. When fat is ingested before or at the start of a carbohydrate meal, it stimulates cholecystokinin secretion, an intestinal hormone that significantly delays gastric emptying. This dilutes the concentration of carbohydrates reaching the intestine at a time. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showed adding 10 to 15 grams of fat to a high glycemic carbohydrate meal reduced the glycemic peak by 22% and the area under the insulin curve by 18%. Frank was 70, a retired businessman from Cleveland. Post-breakfast glucose dropped from average 174 to 148 milligrams per deciliter in 6 weeks when he added butter to whole grain toast. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and if not yet subscribed, click the button and turn on the bell. Way number 4, grass-fed butter. Butter from grass-fed animals has CLA concentration 3 to 5 times higher than conventional butter. CLA improves insulin sensitivity in multiple clinical studies, same findings as the videos on mozzarella and aged cheese. It has higher vitamin K2, MK4 form, that activates osteocalcin, which stimulates insulin secretion by pancreatic beta cells. Better omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, higher beta-carotene with antioxidant effect, identified by more intense yellow color and more complex aroma. Way number 5, ghee, as a substitute for refined vegetable oils. Ghee, clarified butter, is exceptionally rich in butyric acid, which activates AMPK in muscle and intestinal cells, the same mechanism as metformin, and improves intestinal barrier integrity, reducing intestinal permeability that contributes to systemic inflammation. Ghee has a smoke point of 250 degrees Celsius, far higher than regular butter, 150 degrees Celsius, extra virgin olive oil, 190 degrees Celsius, and comparable or superior to most refined vegetable oils. When oils reach their smoke point, unsaturated fatty acids oxidize, producing toxic aldehydes and inflammatory compounds. Ghee can be used for sautéing and high-temperature cooking without these toxic compounds. A study in the Journal of Nutritional Science and Vitaminology compared ghee versus refined vegetable oil in adults with metabolic syndrome for 8 weeks. The ghee group had significant HOMA-IR reduction and improvement in inflammatory markers. Way number 6, butter with cinnamon and spices. The fat in butter increases the bioavailability of fat-soluble active substances in spices. Cinnamon, with its polyphenols that mimic insulin action in muscle cells, partly dissolves in butter fat, improving intestinal absorption. A study in the Journal of Nutrition showed bioavailability of active cinnamon compounds increases significantly when consumed with fat. Practical preparations: compound butter with cinnamon and salt for sweet potato, carrot, or squash. Butter with turmeric for eggs or vegetables. Ghee with cinnamon and cardamom for Indian-style dishes. Margaret was 68, a retired teacher from Phoenix. HbA1c fell from 6.9 to 6.5 after 16 weeks with grass-fed butter and cinnamon blend on vegetables. Way number 7, butter in coffee or morning drink. Coffee itself improves insulin sensitivity through chlorogenic acids that inhibit hepatic glucose 6-phosphatase, reducing fasting hepatic glucose production. Adding butter or ghee to coffee adds delayed gastric emptying, moderating carbohydrate entry from subsequent meals, GLP-1 and cholecystokinin stimulation, preparing metabolism for the first solid meal. G's butyric acid with direct insulin sensitivity improvement, especially relevant because the dawn phenomenon raises fasting blood glucose in diabetics. A clinical trial in the European Journal of Nutrition, adults with prediabetes consuming coffee with a teaspoon of ghee at breakfast for 12 weeks had 12% reduction in fasting glucose and 19% reduction in post-coffee glucose peak. Richard was 72, a retired engineer from Cleveland, with type 2 diabetes and habitual fasting glucose of 138 milligrams per deciliter. After 12 weeks of daily ghee coffee, fasting glucose fell to 121 milligrams per deciliter and HbA1c from 7.2 to 6.8. Summary of the 7 ways. Way 1, butter versus margarine. Eliminate trans fat. Add CLA plus K2 plus butyric acid. Way 2, with vegetables, increased fat-soluble vitamin absorption plus carbohydrate absorption delay, AJCN, negative 22% peak. Way 3, before carbohydrates, cholecystokinin delays gastric emptying. Way 4, grass-fed butter, 3 to 5 times higher, CLA plus K, 2 MK4 plus omega-3. Way 5, ghee. Butyric acid activates AMPK plus 250 degrees Celsius smoke point, JNS-HOMA-IR. Way 6, with cinnamon/spices, increase bioavailability of active compounds. Way 7, in coffee, chlorogenic acids plus GLP-1 plus butyric acid, EJN, negative 12% fasting glucose, the dairy fat paradox for the diabetic. The Pure Study meta-analysis with over 135,000 participants, published in Lancet 2017, showed that total fat consumption, including saturated fat, was inversely associated with mortality risk. The most consistent dietary predictor of metabolic worsening was refined carbohydrate consumption, not natural dairy fat. A European Journal of Clinical Nutrition meta-analysis 2016, replacing dairy-saturated fat with carbohydrates was associated with worsening glycemic markers. Natural butter showed no deterioration and in some subgroups was associated with HOMAIR improvement. About butyric acid and intestinal permeability. Butyric acid in butter and especially ghee has effects beyond immediate glycemic control. As a short-chain fatty acid, it is the preferred energy substrate for colon cells and has anti-inflammatory effects on the intestinal mucosa, reducing intestinal permeability that in type 2 diabetes is frequently increased and contributes to the low-grade systemic inflammation perpetuating insulin resistance. Recent cell metabolism research suggests propionate also directly modulates hepatic glucose production through hepatic AMPK activation, the same enzyme activated by metformin. Practical plan. Step 1. Eliminate margarine completely, replace with natural butter. Step 2. Add a teaspoon of butter or ghee to cooked vegetables at every main meal. Step 3. Use butter as the first flavor of breakfast, before any carbohydrate. Step 4. Adopt grass-fed butter when possible for higher CLA and K2. Step 5. Substitute refined vegetable oils with ghee for high-temperature cooking. Step 6. Try compound butter with cinnamon. Step 7. Try ghee coffee at breakfast. Monitor with glucometer after each change. 5 key takeaways. 1. Natural butter does not cause diabetes. Trans fat from margarines does worsen insulin resistance. 2. Grass-fed butter contains CLA, vitamin K2, and omega-3 that improve insulin sensitivity. 3. Adding butter before carbohydrates reduces postprandial glycemic peak by 22%. 4. Ghee has butyric acid that activates AMPK, the same mechanism as metformin, and a 250 degrees Celsius smoke point ideal for cooking. 5. Ghee coffee on an empty stomach reduces fasting glucose by 12%. My friend, butter is not the enemy. Natural dairy fat, with its bioactive compounds, butyric acid, CLA, vitamin K2, fat-soluble vitamins, supports, not harms, glycemic control when used correctly. God bless you and give you much health. Until next time. Why the distinction between natural butter and industrial fats matters so much for diabetes management. The oversimplified message that fat is bad for diabetics conflates very different products. Natural butter with its bioactive compounds, industrial trans fat margarine, refined polyunsaturated vegetable oils high in omega-6, and naturally fermented dairy fats. Each of these has a fundamentally different metabolic profile. The science that has emerged from large prospective cohorts and meta-analyses is consistent. Natural dairy fat, especially from grass-fed animals, is not associated with increased diabetes risk and in many analyses is associated with reduced risk. The foods that are associated with increased type 2 diabetes risk are refined carbohydrates and trans fats. Returning natural butter to the diabetic's kitchen is an act of scientific precision, not dietary permissiveness. It means applying the evidence correctly rather than following an outdated dogma that the industry of margarine and refined vegetable oils spent billions to promote. The cultural dimension of butter and cooking quality. Butter makes food taste better, and this is not irrelevant from a diabetes management perspective. People with diabetes who cook with enjoyable flavors and satisfying fats are more likely to maintain their dietary plan long-term. a dietary plan built entirely on restriction, flavorless fat-free preparations, and elimination of pleasurable foods erodes motivation and adherence over time. Butter, used wisely and in appropriate portions, is a flavor enhancer that simultaneously improves metabolic outcomes. That is exactly the type of dietary adjustment that builds long-term sustainability. And long-term sustainability is what produces durable improvements in HbA1c and fasting glucose. The glucometer as personal validator, the most direct evidence you can gather. On 2 different days, eat the same carbohydrate-containing meal. Day 1, eat the meal without butter. Day 2, add a teaspoon of butter or ghee before the meal or directly on the vegetables. Measure blood glucose before eating and 1 hour and 2 hours after in both cases. The difference in the 1-hour peak, typically 15 to 25 points lower when butter was included, is direct evidence that the gastric emptying delay mechanism is working for you specifically. This personal glucometer experiment is the most persuasive demonstration of how adding a small amount of natural fat changes the glycemic trajectory of a meal. Historical context: the industry-funded science that shaped dietary policy. The story of how natural butter was replaced by trans-fat margarine as the healthy choice is one of the most significant public health mistakes of the 20th century. It was enabled by industry-funded research, selective data analysis, and the conflation of very different types of fat. The correction, now supported by multiple large meta-analyses and long-term prospective cohorts, including the PURE study, is clear. Natural dairy fat from quality sources, used in appropriate portions, is compatible with good metabolic health and better diabetes management than the carbohydrates it was replaced with. 7 ways to use butter wisely. A kitchen that is both more delicious and more metabolically intelligent. God bless you and give you much health. Until next time, the butyric acid mechanism in detail. Butyric acid, present in butter and especially concentrated in ghee, is a short-chain fatty acid with multiple documented mechanisms relevant to diabetes management. First, it is the preferred energy source for colonocytes, the cells lining the large intestine, where it promotes cell health and reduces intestinal inflammation. Second, it directly activates AMPK, AMP-activated protein kinase, in both muscle cells and intestinal epithelial cells. AMPK activation increases glucose uptake in muscles independently of insulin through upregulation of GLUT4 glucose transporter expression. This is the same mechanism used by metformin, the most prescribed anti-diabetic drug in the world. Third, butyric acid strengthens tight junctions between intestinal cells, reducing intestinal permeability. The leaky gut phenomenon that allows bacterial endotoxins like lipopolysaccharide, LPS, to enter circulation. LPS in circulation triggers an immune response that promotes systemic inflammation and directly worsens insulin resistance. Fourth, butyric acid modulates the expression of genes involved in lipid and glucose metabolism in the liver, shifting the organ toward better metabolic efficiency. The concentration of butyric acid in conventional butter is approximately 3 to 4% of total fat weight. In ghee, clarified butter, this concentration is higher because water and milk proteins are removed during clarification. Regular consumption of 1 to 2 teaspoons of ghee provides a meaningful daily dose of butyric acid that contributes to these metabolic effects, the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio and insulin resistance. Modern diets are typically very high in omega-6 fatty acids relative to omega-3, with ratios often exceeding 15 to 1 or 20 to 1 in Western populations, compared to the evolutionary optimal of approximately 1 to 1 to 4 to 1. This extreme imbalance toward omega-6 promotes systemic inflammation through several pathways. Omega-6 fatty acids are precursors to pro-inflammatory eicosanoids, including arachidonic acid derivatives. Chronic elevation of these pro-inflammatory signaling molecules impairs insulin receptor function and promotes insulin resistance at the cellular level. Conventional butter from grain-fed cows typically has a ratio around 1 to 6. Still better than most refined vegetable oils. Grass-fed butter has a ratio approaching 1:1, optimal for anti-inflammatory effect. When you choose grass-fed butter over margarine or high omega-6 vegetable oils for your daily cooking fat, you are meaningfully shifting the omega-3 to omega-6 balance in your diet, which over weeks and months of consistent use contributes to reduced systemic inflammation and improved insulin sensitivity. Practical buying guide for quality butter. For maximum metabolic benefit from butter, look for grass-fed or pasture-raised on the label. This ensures higher CLA, K2, and omega-3 content. Color matters. Butter from truly pastured cows is noticeably yellower than conventional butter due to higher beta-carotene content. Organic does not automatically mean grass-fed. Check specifically for pasture-raised or grass-fed designation. For ghee, homemade ghee from grass-fed butter is the highest quality option. Commercial ghee from grass-fed sources is widely available in health food stores and online. Avoid ghee made from conventional dairy unless grass-fed options are unavailable. 7 ways to use butter that science associates with blood sugar control. Incorporate them gradually, monitor with your glucometer, and observe the measurable improvements that follow. Natural dairy fat is your kitchen ally, not your enemy. God bless you and give you much health. Until next time. The dawn phenomenon and why ghee coffee specifically helps. The dawn phenomenon, the early morning rise in blood glucose that occurs between approximately 4 and 8 a.m., is caused by the release of cortisol, growth hormone, and glucagon that prepare the body for waking by increasing hepatic glucose production. In people with type 2 diabetes, this natural hormonal pattern produces a disproportionate rise in fasting blood glucose that sets a challenging baseline for the entire day. Coffee's chlorogenic acids partially address this by inhibiting glucose 6-phosphatase, the enzyme that enables the liver to release glucose. Adding ghee to that same coffee adds a second layer of protection. The butyric acid in ghee further inhibits hepatic glucose production through AMPK activation, while the fat content of the ghee delays gastric emptying, which means that even if breakfast is consumed shortly after the coffee, the carbohydrates from breakfast will enter the bloodstream more slowly. The combination of chlorogenic acids from coffee and butyric acid from ghee, working through complementary mechanisms, makes ghee coffee a particularly effective morning strategy for people who struggle with elevated fasting glucose. The 12% fasting glucose reduction documented in the European Journal of Nutrition trial is clinically meaningful. For someone with fasting glucose of 140 milligrams per deciliter, a 12% reduction brings them to approximately 123 milligrams per deciliter, closer to the normal range. Start with a small amount of ghee, a quarter teaspoon, and increase gradually as tolerated. The coffee should be unsweetened. The result is a morning ritual that is both pleasurable and metabolically supportive. Summary for action today. Replace any margarine in your kitchen with natural butter this week. Add half a teaspoon of butter or ghee to the vegetables at every main meal. Try ghee coffee at breakfast if you drink coffee. These 3 changes alone can produce measurable improvements in your glucometer readings within 4 to 8 weeks. Natural dairy fat, chosen wisely and used in appropriate portions, is a metabolic ally, not an enemy. The science is clear. Your glucometer will confirm it. God bless you. 7 ways: a smarter kitchen, a better managed diabetes. Until next time with more evidence-based tips for living better with diabetes.